Do you believe in miracles? We got Fizzle in the house. Fizzle, what's good, man? Fizzle, glad to have you here.
Let's go. This the South Harmon Podcast. Glad you here today. Hit that Patreon link if you here to stay. Dynasty best ball, that's my favorite way. 40 chess trade show. Let's make a trade today or check a AMA. You know Adam at the ATM. Mike always in the building. He gon' stay with him. They gon' start every show off with their own trade. Fantasy's a big ocean. They made their own wave. Make sure you tapping in Tuesdays and Saturdays. Tuesday night, Saturday morning, ain't no better way. Hit that notification bell when the news break. Go subscribe right now, don't get the news late. Destination Devi, that's the team. Dynasty football, man, that's my favorite thing. I remember Biggie said it was all a dream. Now people watching on their phones and computer screens. Welcome to the team. Let's start the show.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back into the 40 Chess Dynasty Trade Show. As you can tell, Mike is not here, but Mike is also here. Our Mike is on vacation. He's working nights, but we got Mike Liu in the building. If you don't know who Mike Liu is, this is one of the OGs, one of the GOATs in my personal opinion. One of the guys I started watching, part of the reason Mike and I do content. You may have caught him on BDGE, Bunk Bed Breakdowns back in the day with Noah, Market Watch Mondays, whatever it may have been. We got him to come out of retirement. It's like a Marshawn Lynch deal. You know, he had to sneak the shoes up, but we had to get him back. See if we can get one last show out of him. So, Mike, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. Happy to be on the show. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the kind words. I'm always usually like very excited to see like new content creators kind of pop into the space. I remember when before I retired and hung up the cleats, it was getting a little too like old for me. Like it wasn't like any more fresh content. So I'm always excited to see new people join the space, especially like more on the strategy side. That's always been like kind of my bread and butter and what I was most interested in. So kind of glad to see folks like you kind of carry the torch and keep it going. Even though I'm not creating content anymore, I'm still playing fantasy. I'm still keeping up with football. I still love that sport. I always will. So it's been good.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. I know you're playing in a bunch of leagues. So even though you haven't done content lately, I know that you're going to have actionable advice for people. And this is pretty much a strategy show. We do like we'll do player analysis and stuff, but the reality is that's not really where our edges are won. So everybody here watching the show, if you can, go down. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please do so. Helps us out tremendously trying to grow this channel. Also, if it's valuable to you, leave a like, leave a comment, let us know what you think of the trades. But without further ado, Mike, we'll get into the first trade. How it starts off, we always start off with one of our own trades. So, we show what we're doing. It's not just us grading everybody else's trade. So we're going to start off with the trade I made. So here it is. This is a 12-team Superflex league. It's a lineup league, so it's not a best ball league. Starting 9. So this is probably a move, if I'm keeping it real, that I really wouldn't have made until playing in a lot of different leagues and realizing in a start 9 league for me, the reason I make a trade like this is it feels like an overpay, but Patrick Mahomes in a format like this is extremely valuable. And I'm basically up-tiering from Dak to Mahomes. I'm giving up DeAndre Swift. I'm giving up a 111. I'm giving up 112, and I'm giving up 103 to go get Patrick Mahomes. Personally, like I know it feels expensive, but this is what it was going to cost if I wanted to get Mahomes. And the truth is, the Gleaton owner doesn't really make a lot of trades. So I knew I had to overpay. I started with an offer of Dak, Swift, 112, 111. He basically said, you got to throw in 103. To me, it felt heavy, but the more I thought about it, I wanted to secure Mahomes. I now have Mahomes. Last week you saw it's the same league. So now my quarterbacks are Mahomes and Lamar. But Mike, what are your thoughts on this given the format? And, it's a heavy price tag, but what do you think?
Start 9. So that's what quarterback, 3 wide receiver, 2 running back, super flex, and then 2 flex.
Yeah, exactly. So it's 2 running back, 2 receiver, 2 flex, a super flex, and the QB.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think like it's definitely an overpay, but like here's the thing, like when I was playing, um, it's always hard to just analyze trades in a vacuum, and the reason why is because like at the end of the day you just want to like win, right? And you're trying to make a trade that makes your team better. So it kind of really depends on what the rest of your team looks like. Like if I were to say, you made this trade and then now you have no depth, like that would probably not be a great trade because like, you put all your eggs in one basket, and as good as Mahomes is, like in my experience, like the teams that make it to the end are the ones that can win the war of attrition. And you're pretty much, I guess, giving up at least 3 starters, maybe more, depending on how the 1.11 and 1.12 pan out. Actually, that's funny. Ewok Village. I'm pretty sure he's in one of my leagues or something like that.
Yeah, he probably is.
So I
Ryan.
think,
Yeah. He's actually the defending
yeah,
champ,
so
as you can see, at 112. Yep.
yeah, for sure. So I think, yeah, I mean, it just kind of depends on the rest of your team and what it looks like after this. But like when you go for an asset, right? When you go for an asset like Mahomes, when you go for like a Joe Burrow, like Justin Herbert, like all these types of guys, right? And the top wide receivers like Justin Jefferson, like you're not going to get a steal on those guys. Like that just never happens because
Right.
everyone wants them. They know they're really good, so you're going to have to overpay to get them. So then the equation always just becomes, can your team afford the overpay? And if you can afford the overpay and it makes your team like drastically better, then you can always justify it because hopefully you would have made enough winning trades throughout the rest of the stuff. That's how I always thought about it. It's like I look at my teams and I'm like, okay, if I make an overpay for this player, one, does it make my team drastically better? And two, like, does it take my like my risk ability to absorb risk like significantly down? And if the answer to the one is yes, and the answer is no to the other, then I'm usually okay overpaying because I would have accumulated enough value through other trades. But when you make a play for a superstar, like you can't get it without overpaying. I mean, that's just the reality of things.
I'm glad, like when you're talking through that, there's a lot of points I think you made there that is honestly part of the reason I did this, right? The reality is I have done a lot of the principles you kind of talked about on your shows. So as you see, I mean, I have 323 first. I'd already moved 102. I had moved some 23 picks. I still have 4 seconds, and I have 4 first and 24. So to your point, like, the Iron Bank, like I have a bunch of picks in 24, even once the team's assembled. I have seconds to kind of fill the running back spot. I do have A.J. Brown. I have some studs. This definitely hurts my depth. Like, I'm not going to say it doesn't. And you don't want to give up, it's not ideal to give up 3 picks in the first round because we know even though it's 111 and 112, it's still a first round, and this is a deep class. But I think the reality was in start 9, what I was realizing is I had spent so much on picks and the way my team was formed. Like, I really wanted to get 2 anchor quarterbacks, and I was basically okay overpaying, knowing I can find the other spots and replace them a little easier, I think, whether it's running back.
Yep.
The top-end receivers, like you said, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, you're not going to get those guys cheap. But I think I can find replacement-level guys, and in start 9, the 2 quarterbacks, if you have 2 elite quarterbacks, now the rest of the teams that you're going to play, they have the 7 spots to try to catch up to the quarterbacks who score more than everyone else. So it's an overpay, probably on paper, but to me in a start 9 lineup league, like, it was worth it for me to do it. I'll say this, like, to everyone watching, I think the biggest point here is Mahomes is probably worth this. But if your team has not been built up with enough equity and you spend all this on Mahomes, can you form a team around him? And I think that's where, like, just this generic trade may not be the correct move for every single team that's playing in a league like this. So kind of want to get those points out. Yep.
Yeah, because what happens is, like, let's say your team is not in that space. Let's say you don't have those 424 first or whatever, right? What's going to happen is you're going to realize, oh, shit, like, my team's actually not good enough to carry a player like Mahomes, and then you're going to trade him for less than what you paid. And I see it all the time. It happens every single time, every single year. Every league I'm in, actually maybe not so many my longer leagues because a lot of those guys are pretty fucking sharp now. But yeah, you see it all the time, man. People like go after the guy, they go all in on that one player, that one superstar, that stud, and then next thing you know, like, they're trading him away to like get back more shots at the board, right? And that's really what it is. You talk about the Iron Bank, like, that's the concept that I've always played with, in fantasy. Like no matter how good my teams are, I'm always trying to reload and restock on picks to just keep my championship team going.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have that type of equity, not only does it mean you can pull trades like this, it gives you a little bit more breathing room for mistakes when trades don't work out, because nobody bats 1,000. So some of these times you're going to make a trade, it's not going to work out, and you're going to need that like cushion. So if you don't have that cushion, like if you only had one 2024 first, for example, like there's no way I'd make this trade. Like not in like a million years, because if you make the mistake, let's say Mahomes get injured, like it's over for your team for like multiple years. So that's kind of how I think about it.
No, I mean I'm literally the same way. Had I not had all those first built up in 24, I probably wouldn't made this trade too. And I think the last point I'll make is, you made a really good point there about one, if your team's not appropriately built around Mahomes, a lot of times people will be like, man, I need to get depth built up, and they'll end up trying to tear down on Mahomes. If you made a trade like this and then you try to tear down on Mahomes, you're never going to get out what you paid for him. Secondly is, I think this year, Mike, and in this team specifically, you can talk about this with, I can at least. I had this team in start 9 where, so Dak got hurt early and wasn't actually really all that great this year. Wasn't the Dak you were hoping for. And then 2, Matthew Stafford, my other quarterback, sucked and then got hurt at the end. Those 2 quarterbacks ended up costing my team drastically, to the point where this team was, like at this time last year, you would have looked at my team and said, that's a juggernaut team. But it turns out my pick that I had already sent away, banking on my team, that ended up being the 104. So now I have, 3 other 24s plus mine. So one, if things don't go right, I have my liquidity, like my own pick, to control how things are going. And I also have everyone else's to play with the variance. So I'm excited to do it this way. But I will say once again, this is not a move for everyone to make. So Mike and I are on the same page on this one. I'm overpaying probably in value, but I'm willing to do it to go get the asset, and I have built up the depth to do it. Getting into another trade, let's just not talk about me up here, So we have a 12-team Superflex lineup. So basically the same thing as last one, except it's start 10 now. So it's PPR. Draw 4 is saying he is in a rebuild mode. But let me ask you, like George Pickens going into this year, someone that was pretty hyped. He made some really highlight catches that's, I think, caught his value pretty high. People are excited about him, young ascending receiver. But the 109 versus George Pickens, where are you on that? And then is the addition of 301, like, how do you view this trade?
This is a 12-team?
Yeah, 12-team Superflex PPR, and it's starting 10. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the 301 is kind of like, doesn't really play a huge role. I mean, haven't done like a deep dive on the class yet, but like that, once you get that deep, like it just really doesn't matter. And you can get thirds and fourths back like all the time. Like it's like the easiest asset to get back. I always like squeeze one out of like any other trade. So really it's just 109 versus George Pickens. And George Pickens feels like one of those guys that's like, I like watching him play, right? As a fan of the game, he makes like some incredible plays. He made that absolutely incredible catch, right?
Yes.
But if you look at like his peripherals and his efficiencies, like it's not that great. And part of that's because Pittsburgh sucks and they have no quarterback. But also that's a problem that's not going to be solved this year either. So I would rather take the 109, and not because I necessarily think who I pick at the 109 is going to give me a better player for sure, right? Because, that late in the first round, it's also pretty shoddy. And like as far as like wide receivers go, the class is like okay, like not great, right? It's not going to be like a 2020 2021 type of situation, but the 109 does give me like flexibility, right? Whereas like you look at George Pickens, only you're in a 12-man league, only a subset of that is going to want George Pickens, right? But a much bigger group will want the 109, and if they and the 109 at least gives you an anchor into the draft class. So I don't know how many other picks draw 4 has, but if he has like other first round picks, if he has second round picks, now he has the 109 that places an anchor in the back part of the first round, which like forms like I always described it this way. I liked having as many anchors in the first round as possible, like up to a max of like 3 or 4, and then a bunch of second round and third round picks, because what that means is I can control the flow of the draft. I can always trade back and get players in the same tier that I like. I can always move up, from that anchor. It won't cost me very much because I'll have second and third round picks I can throw around. So that third round pick is basically just like cannon fodder for you to move up and down in drafts. And then the 1.09 serves as like the anchor base for you to maneuver. So When I see the 109, like I don't see a player. I'm not looking at it and saying, hey, I'm going to draft this guy for sure. I'll look at a range of players, but more like, the more important piece is I look at 109 and I say, okay, I have a foothold in this draft at that spot, and it will allow me to maneuver up or down, plus minus a couple of spots to get the player that I want. And if I don't like any players left, chances are some other people will like the players that are left, and I can take that 109. I can flip it into a 2024 first round pick, just a random first round pick, and maybe by variance, by luck, that first round pick ends up being a middle first round pick or a high first round pick. So just a lot of value to be extracted based on the option value of having that pick versus a player like George Pickens, who realistically only a couple of players in your league are going to want. So if I'm rebuilding, I love this move. If I'm not rebuilding, I still love this move. I just love this trade through and through.
Yeah, I love the way you broke that down, because that's exactly the way I would view it. And I think this probably, if you're watching this, it probably depends if you're playing in a portfolio or you're playing in a handful of leagues, and ultimately to your league and how they value things. If you're in a home league that is like very much not hip to the reality of draft picks, everything Mike said, though, is the reality of this pick. Now, if you're in a home league where they don't value picks, and that pick value ascension isn't going to happen for the next 3 months, that's like the only exception here to where I would ever want George Pickens. And even then, I still might be willing to take the risk of the two pieces here. I think the reality of 109 is this. One, we do mock drafts all the time. And 109, a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs fell all the way to 109. Now, there's when you get to a player specifically, even if it's Jahmyr Gibbs, I don't care what you think about anyone. We don't know what he's going to check in weight-wise. We don't know what he's going to end up doing in the NFL. But like 109 if you force me to make the pick of 109, I'm excited about it, because there's 4 quarterbacks currently that have the realistic opportunity to get first-round draft capital. Then you have Bijan Robinson. Mm-hmm. You have some good receivers in this class. So 109 is a pick I like a lot if you force me to make it. But the biggest point you made is two things, I think. George Pickens has a lot of allure, but at the same time, like every single one of your 11 league mates, they don't necessarily view George Pickens as this high-end asset. Like some people may not really be in on George Pickens. The preconceived notions of Pickens locks that into one asset, whatever you think about it. 109 has endless possibilities. You have basically guaranteed value ascension at the combine. You have it at free agency when people start knowing where guys are going, and then ultimately when real players are drafted in the NFL. 109 is going to do nothing but accrue value. I'll say this: typically third rounders, in the past I've been more like just here. I'll get rid of it. I can accrue it later. I want all the seconds in this class because it's a deep running back class. To your point, it's not a 2020. It's not a 2021. I don't think the high-end assets are here in this class. But there's a lot of like pretty good running backs in this class. So at 301, even if you force me to keep it, I can shoot my shot. But the reality is 109 and 301 are just liquidity. You can move up and down the board. You could move back from 109. If someone you really love is at 107, you can move up. 301 becomes a piece that can help you move up if you want to move up. So I want the plethora here. I'm with you. It doesn't even matter if it's rebuild or not. I want the 2-for-1 plus the 109 over Pickens every time. Now, here's the thing. If you end up making these picks, last point I'll make. If you end up making the pick and 109 is now a player and 301 is now a player, when we get to the season this time next year, like Pickens may be valued higher than all of them. But there's so much time that you can move these picks. And like you said, whether it's on the clock or when the hype builds, there's so much more flexibility with the pick. So ultimately, I want draw 4 side here pretty easy. Any final thoughts other than that?
No, yeah, I think you just brought up a good point, like all the different value accrual. Like, you look at the off-season cycle, it's always a cycle every single year. You have the people that declare, and then people get excited, and then you have the combine, people get excited about the Underwear Olympics, and then you have, the draft, and people get excited, and then like there's always people that emerge out of the draft that people care about a lot more than they should. So a lot of like exit off ramps, like if you think about, the Dynasty draft cycle as like a highway, you have an exit, multiple times. And you don't have that exit with George Pickens. So,
right.
That's why it's like when you compare draft picks this early in the season, off season, to a player that has a lot of question marks, I typically prefer the liquidity of the draft pick.
100% agree. All right. So let's get into a 1-for-1 here. And, Mike has been around a long time in the Dynasty game. He's, like I said, he's one of the first ones I started watching. So Mike has seen probably as much, if more, not more than anyone, how the running back is value is starting to trend down. But at the same time, like, you need running backs. So like this one here is interesting to me. I had to look at it a few different times. I'm kind of interested to hear your thoughts on this one. Before I start it off, let me just say 7 GOAT rings. This is a guy that makes the show almost every single week, and he has a notoriety for getting over on people. I don't know that this one is a, necessarily get over on someone, but what are your thoughts here? Is it any different than last trade, or with Barkley, is it different for you?
It's different. I mean, I've always been a big fan of Barkley, especially like last season. I thought he was a great value. And I think this season he'll still be a great value. I don't think this trade is necessarily like a bad one for either side. Like, I don't know what the intentions are, but like, typically you do want to cycle out of running backs like once they hit that curve. But I feel like now that everyone kind of understands the running back age curve, so there's 2 curves, right? There's the age curve, like the production curve, and then there's like the value curve, right? And that applies to all players, whether it's a wide receiver, running back, tight end. It's just that wide receiver and tight end hit much later. Running back, the value curve kind of plummets as soon as like usually right when the rookie contract ends. That's when like people start trying to get out on running backs, but the production curve doesn't really fall off for a lot longer than that. So if you look at like the CMCs of the world, if you look at like Derrick Henry, if you look at the truly elite running backs, which I think Saquon Barkley kind of falls into that class, like with the exception of like Todd Gurley, who like had a busted up knee, like a lot of them produce well into, later on in their career. So in terms of like how I like approach building my teams is if I'm in a contention window, I'm like always trying to make a move to get the most bang for buck production wise. And the best way to get bang for buck production wise is to acquire, assets, whether it's running backs or wide receivers that have hit the value curve, have hit the value cliff, which means like dynasty communities like, fuck these guys, I'm out on them, they suck, whatever, blah, blah, but haven't necessarily hit the production curve yet. So I think Barkley kind of falls in that camp. And I think if I look back at 2022, late 2021, coming into 2022, and then probably this year as well, going to 2023, I've never made like as many moves and drafted as many veterans as these couple of years, just because I feel like the pendulum has swung so far in the opposite direction where people are like allergic to anyone who's getting older.
Especially this time of year, right? Yes.
Yeah. Especially this time of year where, people are getting all hyped on the running backs and the quarterbacks and all that stuff. You can get a lot of value for aging vets. And like, it's not even like Barkley's that old. I mean, if you look at Barkley's production, like he missed like a couple seasons to injury. Last year was his like first full season in like forever. And then, now he's going in again with another very healthy season. And the Giants still suck. They've always sucked. But, they have a better coach now. Hopefully they add some pieces on offense. But I do think like Barkley is just someone that's good for value. So in this trade, I don't think it's like unfair for either side. If you want to look at like pure value, like who's going to accrue the most value and like win the trade, so to speak, like maybe it's the 102 because people want to go for that spot. But to be honest, the drop off from 101 to 102 is so big. Like I've been touting Bijan Robinson like since, I don't know, 2-3 years ago. Like 2 years, I think like 2 years ago, I said Bijan Robinson's the top 5 running back today. And people hated it because like, oh, how can you, get a Devi, blah, blah, blah. But like, like now, like name one running back that you can give up and get Bijan Robinson in return. You can't.
It doesn't exist. No,
it doesn't exist. Right. So, but like the drop off from the 101 to 102, if I think about my tiers and how I value those picks, like 101 is a first round pick, and then like 102 is like 2, 3, 4 rounds later. So from value wise, I could see 102 winning, but like, Big Black Scooby, if his team is in a contention window, like this is a trade I would make like nearly all the time because 3 down running backs like barely exist anymore, no matter how good of a draft profile you have.
That's hard hitting analysis, man, because it's a lot of the way I view it. So let me start with Barkley's side, because I think you already hit a lot of the points. But in a nutshell, if you were to tell me you're going to bank on a running back that's aging, that you have to kind of hold. If you want to bet on one of them breaking the mold, Henry's proven it, right? And I've been basically more of a sell Henry because of the age and fear of him being injured. And look how that's turned out. Not well. But if you're going to bet on one running back to age well, it's fucking Saquon Barkley. And it's not really close. I mean, outside of, Bijan coming in this year, we've never seen a guy that looks like him, can play like him, and to your point, is going to be in a scenario now where teams basically deploy two different backs at least a lot of places. Saquon Barkley is looking at 85% of snap share, sometimes 90% in a game. Like that almost doesn't exist. Even really good running backs don't see all the work and third down work and can catch the football and can break any single play to the house. That's what Saquon Barkley provides. So if you tell me right now that your team is a very strong contender and like you're sure about it, and the thing you're really missing is that hero RB or that top RB, and you want to make this bet, I don't really have a problem with it. I'll say this. I think this really depends on the two conversations. If this is a league that isn't very active and is likely not trading on the clock much, when we get to this time next year, I think Barkley is still going to be valued as a top 5 running back. Mm-hmm. But when you talk about 102, I think this is where it's interesting. You talked about it already with 109. Like, I don't actually view 102 as a player yet. I do think if you force me to make it, I'm taking the top quarterback because everyone's taking Bijan at 101 almost guaranteed. Unless it's like a 14 or a 16 team league, Bijan's basically a lock to go 101. Like, it doesn't matter. So I get the top pick of quarterback. And the reason I bring that up, you can move 102, but right now, the other thing that's happening is the quarterback market is as top heavy, and then all of a sudden you get to shit very quick, right? So there's a lot of people chasing quarterback, which I think here's what I'll say. I don't think there's a single prospect in this class that looks like, oh my God, I want Bryce Young, I want CJ Stroud. Like, you're not, freaking out over them like you may have in the 2021 class or 2020 class. But I think one of these quarterbacks is going to land top 5 in a spot that's decent enough that people are like, oh shit, I want CJ Stroud for the Colts. So
yep.
That's the type of value that I think if this is a move that has flippability in mind, I want 7 goat ring side. And typically in leagues that are active, I would prefer that. But I'll say this, like, if you are somebody that has a very good contending team and you don't make a ton of moves, like, I'm fine also taking the other side. Like, I'll say overall I'll lean 7 goat ring side because of my principles, but this is not egregious either way, the way I view it personally.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I think if you just want to look at pure value in a vacuum, he probably wins out. But if I'm looking at my team and like this is the piece that kind of really puts me across the top, then I like the trade. And when I say like that's a piece you need, like there's a big difference. I think between how I approach trading and how a lot of people do. They're like, oh, if I get this running back, like that's the one, like with him, I'm going to win. And like, I don't have like, I have a bunch of other holes, but this is the one. Like if all you have is Saquon Barkley and you're making this move, probably not ideal, right? This
Correct.
piece has to be the piece that like really pushes you over the edge. Like you probably have, hopefully you have like a couple other running backs. You have some really stacked wide receivers. You have 2 top 15 quarterbacks. And you're like, okay, if I get Saquon Barkley here, and even if I lose 1 or 2 of my other pieces, I'm still a top contender. That's the type of scenario where I'm looking to make a trade like this because you have enough cushion again to like embrace the variance that hits inevitably in every season. So that's how I look at the trade. So it shouldn't be like before Saquon Barkley, I had like 0 RB and I had like 1 shitty running back that I could start, and now I'm making this trade. That's not the scenario you want to be in. You want to have like enough depth pieces where if Saquon misses a couple of weeks or if one of your other running backs goes down, you can still put up a very formidable lineup. So I don't know what the situation is for him, but if that's the situation, then even though you lose a little bit of value on the trade, I think it's a good trade to make. The chances of you getting a running back at 102, I know everyone loves Jahmyr Gibbs. I like him too. But chances of him turning into Saquon Barkley in year 1 are actually like pretty low, right? So
They're very low, yeah. Like, yeah. And I guess the one thing you brought up already is 1 for 1. Like if you told me that this is the 101, I mean, this is a home run. Because you get to de-age Saquon Barkley and get the best running back that's a rookie. There's no question. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't exist at 102. I think it's enough analysis to get to the next one. The last thing I will say is this. I think one thing that you're getting to is if you've basically roster constructed correctly and your team can afford it, as far as like Barkley comes in now as your 1, which puts your 2 down and your team is very stacked, you can make the play. The one thing I'll say is 7 Goat Rings has basically shown us weekly that he has abused Big Black Scooby, and I'm not very confident in that he has the roster that you're talking about. If Big Black Scooby has a contending roster that's deep, though, I'm with you. I'd be okay with this. I think more often than not I'll take the 102, but it's a fair trade on the surface, which is rare for 7 Goat Rings. All right, 12-team Superflex lineup. I'm actually curious how you view this one here, because like we know how the running back market is, and Joe Mixon is a running back I think that's pretty polarizing. I have a lot of thoughts here, but I'm curious, Mike, what you think of here. Like Kenyon Drake I don't think is a piece that matters a ton. He's a body that if everything breaks right, he could be startable, but he's not a piece that means a lot. He's also getting pretty old. So it's really like a small plus and a 24 first, which is generic. I mean, we know that's just generic right now. I don't care if it looks good or doesn't. That's generic versus Joe Mixon.
Yeah. So I mean, long time like Joe Mixon stan. But he was like brutally awful last year. Just like I was watching him, like, man, what happened? Like this guy used to be like really good. He used to be like pretty elusive. He's just not been very, very good. But I think when I look at this, like a random 2024 first, again, this is like the point where the assets kind of cross, right? Like Joe Mixon's going down, this asset's going to keep going up. 2024 class. If you guys don't play Devi, maybe you don't know as many of the names, but there are a lot of really, really good names coming out of 2024. So I would rather have the 2024 first, not only because Joe Mixon's declining, but even if you swap in another older running back like in his place, the 2024 again comes down to liquidity, right? Like in the season, right? You're going to be able to trade that 2024 for whatever asset that you need, which you can't save for Joe Mixon. Maybe you need a running back right now, or you think you need a running back right now. Like, what happens if they go out and draft the running back? Like, there's so much risk associated with this particular asset. Like, Joe Mixon's price could tank. I don't really see how it could go up. Like, even if they don't draft any running back, so like, hey, he's the guy, he's the man, yada yada yada. And this is someone that has Joe Mixon on a lot of rosters actually. But like his value accrual events are just non-existent. I don't see any way for him to accrue value. Like his value really can only go down because he's old. And 2, they could draft someone. So I would much rather have the 2024 because, maybe I don't need Joe Mixon. Maybe later on I need a wide receiver. I need a tight end, or I need to upgrade my quarterback or whatever. Like if you need Joe Mixon to win on your team, I'm sorry to break it to you, but you probably don't have a championship contending team. So that's just a very harsh reality. Whereas like if you and then if you don't need Joe Mixon to win, then I would rather have the 2024 first because it gives me the flexibility to trade for whatever I want in the season if I am a contender. And if I'm not a contender, then I just sit on it and as a rebuilder and wait for the pick to go up in value. So that's kind of how I view this trade.
I think it's pretty well spoken. Let me say a couple things. One, you brought up the risk of Joe Mixon, and I think it's actually like I'm not here to talk about what happened back in Oklahoma. I think that's different. But what's interesting is just a couple weeks ago there was an incident off the field. Turned out the arrest warrant that came out for Joe Mixon was rescinded. It doesn't look like anything's going to happen, but there's another risk point is anything off the field that Joe Mixon does, right? Like there's so many things. He could get hurt in the offseason. If you remember, Josh Jacobs avoided 2 years ago a DUI where he crashed his car. Like there's things with a player that force that one asset where if something happens, good or bad, Henry Ruggs, he's in jail now. Like I'm not saying Joe Mixon's that a bad person to that level. I'm just my point is that there's things that can happen with Joe Mixon that guarantee his value goes down. To your point, there's basically nothing. Like I don't care. The only thing that can happen for his value to go up at all is that it's going to go down because of the youth movement. And then if at this time next year all they have back is Samaje Perine, they don't do anything at running back. Now during the season as it's approaching, you might get a little bit of value bump back from Mixon. But there's no explosion coming for Joe Mixon as far as value goes. Last year, you kind of saw a guy that didn't, one, get the 3-down workload. I think everybody's kind of wanted that, but he doesn't earn it. And then 2, he had so many underwhelming games. He had the one crazy explosion game for like 48 points. But this is a guy that's getting older, and this just makes so much sense to trade. And I'll say the last point, kind of looking at this in reverse. If I'm trash time, and I think the biggest point I can make to everyone watching is this. If you do like Joe Mixon, that 24 first is so much more certain to accrue value. Timing is the biggest thing I'll say with this trade. I'm never going to do this trade in February. I've learned from what I've learned, I'll never do this trade ever again in February. Now, if we're talking about I still have these assets and we are in, kind of getting playoff push, let's say October range, right? And my team is 7-8 wins, right? And this 24 first pick looks later, like it's a playoff team. All of a sudden now, yeah, okay, if you want to make that move and get rid of Kenyon Drake, who's doing nothing, for Joe Mixon when he's shown that he still has the juice and is a contender piece that matters, that's fine. But right now, this is a terrible trade to make, I think, because of timing, has all the edges of the 24 pick and no edges to Joe Mixon. Last thing you already hit on is that this 24 class is juice, man. Like, if there's any scenario where GM23 is worth betting against, Caleb Williams, Drake May, all the running backs, Marvin Harrison Jr., I want this 24 pick by a mile. And then Kenyon Drake I don't really think matters, but if he ends up back in Baltimore as a guy that could maybe on a week where JK's hurt or whatever get snaps, like maybe he's plug and play. So I don't think it's honestly that close. I want Tyler Lorenz in 54 side pretty easy here. All right, so we've been in agreement all along here. So all right, we're going to get into some quarterback trades here. This one here is pretty interesting to me on a couple different levels. It's 12-team Superflex PPR. We're starting 10, but the thing here, Mike, is this is a best ball league. So when we're talking best ball versus lineup, obviously you know the difference. But in like best ball dynasty, what's crazy is some of these rosters you can have 35, 40 roster spots. So it really, really becomes about depth because you can't just you don't just press the button on somebody. Like you get all the shots. Some of the guys that don't matter in lineup matter in best ball. I guess there's a few different ways to look at this. This is basically a tier down. You're tearing down from Dak to go get Daniel Jones, and you're adding a 24 first that's not a part of this trade, a random team. I'll say this. Dak, it feels like, is getting to the point where it's starting to feel like the hate may be going a little too far on him as far as a dynasty quarterback asset. He's about to be 30. He's still got plenty of time. He didn't have the greatest season this year. He was hurt as well. He had the thumb injury. Daniel Jones is also kind of peaking, which is what's hard about this. This is a guy that, going into this year, people were ready to write off. Brian Dable has kind of helped resurrect him. He had 700 rushing yards. I think his rushing upside is something that makes him intriguing, whether you like him or not. And then you're adding the 24 asset. I'm curious here, Mike, what your thoughts are.
So for me, again, it kind of comes down to what their teams look like. Value-wise, like I kind of like the Daniel Jones side. I know everyone like wrote him off. I actually liked him last year in 2022. I felt like I'm not saying he's good or anything, right? I'm not saying this guy is going to become a superstar, but like frankly, we haven't really given him like a fair shot yet. Obviously, he makes a lot of bonehead moves and stuff like that, but he hasn't had a weapon. Like the Giants like receiver room has been like a sorry excuse for an offense for as long as we can remember now. I mean, the only person he can throw to is like Saquon Barkley. Like Kenny Galladay, never done anything since he joined there. Kadarius Toney went there, got injured, and left.
Dude, I think Mike or myself could have had as many catches as Kenny Galladay did for the Giants this year. I think he had 6 catches all year. Like he's been a disaster since they paid him.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing is like I like trades like this because I don't know if Go Devil intended this, but I like making trades like this myself back in the day where I acquire a risky asset, whether it's a running back or a quarterback that's kind of dodgy but has some upside, and then I get a pick because that pick is like your floor protection. It's insurance, right? If Daniel Jones goes to 0, right? There's still a chance that you outproduce Dak Prescott with the 2024 first. Now, the odds are not good, obviously, because Dak is still a starting quarterback, and I agree with you. He's gotten way more hate than necessary. Like I think he's someone that's like is starting to fall into like that Kirk Cousins zone for me, where people are like, "Wow, this guy sucks. Like he can't make the playoffs. He can't make a big game, and blah blah blah." Which is all fine and dandy, but I don't care about that for fantasy. I just care if he scores points. And,
exactly. We don't care if he wins in the real NFL if he's scoring points for our fantasy teams. Exactly.
Yeah, like I've been winning championships with Kirk Cousins for ever since I started playing fantasy. So I think like that kind of like falls into that bracket, like and we've seen like the upside of him as well. So obviously I think that the gap is definitely warranted based on the value. But if I'm trying to make like a home run swing, right? I would make this would be like a trade that I would consider accepting, like on the Daniel Jones side, just because, especially if it's best ball, right? The biggest headache with Daniel Jones is like if you guys ever look at his weekly performance, he performs like a wide receiver because like when he's on, he'll hit, like he's a good rushing upside. He runs for touchdowns. He's like actually a lot more athletic than people give him credit for. But like his down weeks are bad, and most of my leagues I play like 6-point touchdown, 4-point interception. So
Right.
when Daniel Jones is a bad week, he kills you. Like he's scoring like
sure.
sometimes negative points, right?
For sure.
But in a best ball format, I'm much more interested because I don't have to worry about doing lineups. And like when he blows up, he blows up. Like when he blows up, he will be like a top 5 quarterback for that week. So if you have other good quarterbacks or not even like good, if you have another stable of quarterbacks which you can play like the best ball game with, I kind of like the value on that end. And then like I said, it's still a fair trade, but I feel like there's a lot more upside on the Daniel Jones in 2024 first side, because there's still a chance that the Giants go out and grab some weapons for this guy, either through free agency and through the draft, and he comes out and he's like, like a poor man's Eli Manning in his prime, but with rushing upside. And that type of quarterback, while not sexy, is enough to be your quarterback 2 to help you win a championship. And then the 2024 first could be anything, right? So, if that becomes a top 3 pick, and you're looking at like a Travion Henderson, or you're looking at a Caleb Williams, like
Yes.
you're looking at some wide receivers in that class, like you could easily flip that 2024 first for like Dak plus in a year, and then you got Daniel Jones for free. So that's why I like these types of trades. When you're acquiring a risky asset, pairing it with a future first, even if it's 2 years out, doesn't matter because it's going to accrue value, and people will give those out for a lot cheaper. So that's the type of trade construct I would always use when I'm trying to acquire a risky asset and trading down from a more call it stable or safer asset, I guess.
Dude, sheesh, man. Getting you on here was a absolute must. Like, okay, so see, I like the way you put that, and the way I view it is this, right? What's interesting, I think people are kind of like, okay, Daniel Jones is at a peak in dynasty value, which it probably is true. Like, and keep trade cut, which I think their trade calc is really, really bad. But I do think that with like rankings, you get a chance to see what people value assets and players as. So Daniel Jones is quarterback 13. So like to that point, yes, has he reached a peak in dynasty value? Like he's not going to crack the top 10 in dynasty value. That you're correct on that. I would agree with anybody that would say that. Whereas Dak Prescott feels like he's starting to reach more of a plateau in value. Like it's probably unlikely he's going to go significantly lower than quarterback 11, 12. Okay. But here's my problem with the trade if you wanted to up tier. If I'm going to send Daniel Jones in my 24 first, which I will absolutely do, it's for a quarterback that, one, has points per game upside that Dak may possess, but it's going to be 2 for a quarterback that has dynasty value higher. Because Dak Prescott, right now, you're sinking into a guy that can't improve his thought process, how he's perceived, until next year if he's lighting the world on fire. Like, he can't do anything in the offseason to increase value. The 24 first will increase in value. Daniel Jones, like, New York's keeping him for next year. Like, you can guarantee. I don't care if it's a franchise tag, if they get a deal done. The other part that you mentioned, which is what's very interesting to me, is this could go so many different ways, right? This last year, if you think about and look at it, Daniel Jones outscored Dak even with 6 points per passing touchdown on a points per game basis. So now I have, like, the way I would view this is if it breaks right again, I at least get the same points as Dak with Daniel Jones, but I add this 24 first, right? That's like the rosy side. All right. Then if Nitrogen's team is worth betting against, if that starts to become a top 6 pick, I can either cash out on it or, God forbid, this time next year, Daniel Jones is still the Giants quarterback. They upgrade weapons, and this is now Caleb Williams or Drake May or someone that Mike already alluded to. you destroy this trade. I think what Mike mentioned, though, which is what people don't think about at this time when they make a trade like this, is let's say it goes wrong, because people have been very out on Daniel Jones. Let's say next year Daniel Jones ends up turning into a pumpkin. You know, he doesn't play well, but maybe he gets hurt, a nagging injury, he can't rush as much. That asset starts coming, maybe not to zero, but significantly down. But that 24 first could still be not everything Dak's worth, but in the range. And if it's an early, if it's a 101, if that's Caleb Williams versus Dak, you still win the trade there. I think that's where there's so many different outs here on Go H Devil side that I want to play up. As much as, like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you if this is start 9 lineup and that nitrogen team's built really well, that, like, I'm an advocate for Daniel Jones long term. It's just from a process move, I want 2 shots, given that the second piece here is liquidity in a class that's really, really dope. So I don't know. That's the way I view it. And then the best ball thing is where I'm really excited, because that 24 first at any point, I might be able to turn in, if it's a top 6 pick, into 2 assets. Like, you might be able to buy 2 receivers that mean something to your team in best ball. Now you have 3 players that are scoring. Like, this, I think, has so many scenarios for Go H Devil to really smash this trade.
Yep, for sure. He's got all of the upside, and the guy trading for Dak has none of the upside and mostly the value downside. So
yeah. Like, the only way that fuck Tom Brady wins this trade is that Dak somehow returns to, like, you know, the form of, like, quarterback 1-2 that he had a few years back. But even then, like, that would be the way he wins. I don't even know if that's the case, if Dak really gets back into the top 6-5 mix of some of the younger elite assets. Because the one thing Dak doesn't do anymore really is rush like he used to.
Yeah.
He still has the ability, but he doesn't really rush, you know?
That's the problem. He's also like 29 years old, right? So he's getting a little bit older. So, you know, if he doesn't continue to kind of excel as a passer, that's why I said he's like, you know, he's like a more, like, slightly sexier, like, version of Kirk Cousins, in that sense. And it's like his value is so capped because, like, who is he going to leap to get into the top 6, right? You know, you think about it from this perspective, like Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, like, you know, Justin Fields to a degree, like, you know, you still have Kyler, and, you know, if Deshaun Watson, like, finally rebounds from his horrible season, it's like, how is he going to get into the top 6? Like, I just don't see a path for him to get there as a 29-year-old quarterback. Like, I mean, there's also the chance that, like, he turns into, like, a Russell Wilson, right? Like, you know, I thought Russell Wilson would be able to bounce back and be really good, and boy, was I wrong. So there's just very little protection to his value downside here. There's literally no insulation. Like, he has to go, like, all pro MVP to, like, maybe even, like, just retain his value, or, like, maybe get a couple of spots. And, like, if he just plays as business as usual, it's an automatic decline. And if he shows any signs of stepping back, it's like a plummet. So it's just like there's very little upside, whereas, like, Go Devil here is getting all the upside, even though he's taking on a riskier bet with Daniel Jones.
1,000%. That's literally exactly how I view it. The other thing is, when you saw my first trade, a lot of basic, like, I'm not going to re-emphasize what he said, but what Mike just said about Dak Prescott is part of the reason I was able, in my own process, to throw him in, even though it was an overpay, to go get Mahomes, because I don't think Dak has realistic upside of significant spots to get into the elite tier. So that's kind of why I still was willing to give him up as an asset that matters in an overpay. All right, so we got, speaking of Lamar and speaking of the top 6 quarterbacks, the one thing, Mike, I've seen, I've made a trade, I've acquired Lamar in one league. He's starting to become polarizing. There's dynasty gamer fatigue, let me say it that way, Mike, where, like, this is an elite asset that means so much when he plays, but the last 2 playoffs he hasn't played for people, and now you have holdout possibly looming. They can't figure out what's going on with, you know, the contract. Yeah, he's somebody that I'm interested in buying when that is the fear from managers, and I can sense it. And I'll say this: I made a trade that was from last week where I acquired Lamar. I sent 102 and Breece Hall, and I got Lamar and Ayuk. Ayuk, by the way, Mike, you got us in on early. It wasn't a great bet when we bought into him going into sophomore year, but now he's starting to flourish and become the receiver we wanted him to be, you know? So I love that trade. But I'll say this, I love this trade way more. More. So I don't know what your thoughts are. I kind of want to let you go first before I really lean into this one.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a Lamar Jackson stan. Like, since after I think as soon as I saw him play his rookie year, I'm like, this is the easiest bet of all time, to just go all in on Lamar. And I did, and I won so many championships that year because Lamar Jackson won his like MVP tear. And then last year I was like, oh, this is another great way to get into Lamar. Obviously he got hurt, and then now there's like all this stuff looming. But like, here's the bottom line: when Lamar Jackson's healthy, like there aren't like, you can't name more than 4 to 5. You can't even name 2 to 3 that
for
sure are going to beat him, because that's like the level of player that he is. That's a level of dynasty asset that he is. And like, as unfair as it is for him to like, people think he's like a system quarterback or whatever. And I'm sure like, the running portion of the game definitely helped him a little bit, but like, what system was he in? Like this guy hasn't had like a legit like, wide receiver room since like for his entirety of his career. So
he's never had.
I still think
Mark Andrews is dope and all, but he's never had like this. Oh my God, look at this receiving corps. Never.
Yeah, and I hope that Rashad Bateman could have been that, and then he got hurt, and it's like we hope Hollywood could have been that, and he always got hurt, and then he got traded.
Right.
So it's kind of like we're playing this like back and forth game, and like if he goes to another team, like I mean, if Lamar Jackson were to ever hit the open market, like there'd be 30 teams lined up. Maybe not 30. So let's see, Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, Herbert. Like aside from those teams, like every single team would line up for a chance to get Lamar Jackson to play on their squad. So
let's call it north of 20 for sure. Like there's at least 20, 22, 24 teams begging to get Lamar.
Yeah. Like I would love to see Lamar Jackson on the Jets. I mean, it's not gonna happen, but like they missed that one piece. Get Lamar Jackson on the Jets. He's got Garrett Wilson, who's an absolute freaking baller.
Elijah Moore all of a sudden maybe gets a little value bump, right?
Yeah, and they got Breece Hall over there. I think that'd be a great thing to see. I would love to see that. And if not, like hopefully he stays in Baltimore. Maybe they franchise tag him. Maybe they hold out. But you're also playing the long game. He's still young. Like I like this trade because at the 102, like again, from the drop off from Bijan Robinson to the 102 is like so huge. And like maybe there's another quarterback that shows up like this, but like this is a former like unanimous like MVP level, like to the point where he was absolutely shredding teams apart. And even last season, like he was still pretty good. Now people are going to say that he gets hurt and because he's running a quarterback. I feel like that myth has for the most part been like dispelled. Like it's not like running quarterbacks get hurt that much anymore because the league protects them so much. But I like this trade because you also get protected because you get a 2025 second round pick back. So assuming this guy still has his own 2025 second, he still has 2 anchoring spots in the 2025 class, which one is 2 years out. But he can still make those types of moves. So if he didn't get the 2025 second back, yes, it'd probably be a little bit more risky. I would still probably make the trade anyways. But the fact that he squeezed out a 2025 second round pick is a great way to kind of manage that risk of downside. So I'm still like very much all in on Lamar Jackson. Like I think he's an absolute stud. And when he's playing, like he's just an absolute animal when it comes to fantasy. So I like the trade personally.
I'm 100% with you. Settings real quick. I forgot to say, I should have said 12 team Superflex PPR lineup and we're starting 10. Mm-hmm. Even more to that format, which like honestly, you could tell me the format. I don't care. Like if it's best ball, we're starting 15, we're starting 17, we're starting 9. Like I don't care. I want Lamar here. But let me say this, like 102, let's say CJ Stroud is the guy. I'm giving a hypothetical. It doesn't matter who it ends up being. Let's say CJ Stroud ends up being the quarterback 1 unanimously come the draft. He gets a decent landing spot. He ends up showing some mobility and is a decent quarterback asset in fantasy and in Superflex. That matters. I'm not going to say like 102 is dog shit. I agree with Mike though. The 101 to 102 drop off is very real, but I'm not going to say that like 102 can't be relevant in Superflex leagues. But I don't see a path for anybody here in this class outside of if Anthony Richardson has elite rushing upside and everything we've seen out of him throwing the football in Florida becomes non-existent. Now all of a sudden he can, he's in a system where it's fantasy friendly and he can check the ball down, and they put him in a position to throw well. Outside of like Anthony Richardson firing on all cylinders, there's no scenario in a quarterback this year that possesses Lamar Jackson's peak MVP season. It just doesn't. Now, if you're telling me that the 25 first is what I have to attach to 102 to go get Lamar, I'd still do it. The problem there would be obviously, like, I don't know how Mr. Wonderful's team's built. I don't know if this team can sustain success with injuries, and then all of a sudden if that 25 pick becomes early, that's a class that people don't know enough about, but has quarterbacks and has, if you're playing like you said in Devy, you know that 25 has valuable players. Here's the thing that's really interesting to me about this trade that I think is such a smash. So if you convince Velasco 1122 that he should take this package and you get Lamar, like, I don't know what his team looks like. Now, if his team is like star-studded, maybe this principle that I'm going to say doesn't apply. But if you're saying I'm going to take Lamar from you in a start 10 league, you don't have the quarterback depth to really contend. Now, all of a sudden, like, there's a scenario. I'm not going to say it's going to happen for sure, but there's a scenario where that 25 first can become late and that 25 second can become mid or early. You're talking about like a 5-4-3 spot swap to get Lamar for 102. Dude, that is crazy to me. And then even if it's the other way around, if this ends up being an early 25 pick and that's a later 25 second, like, I still think even then I want Lamar. But that's if everything goes wrong. I think what could go right is significant. If that's just a couple spot gap between that 25 first and second, which is 2 years out, good God, man. Like, Mr. Wonderful is living a wonderful life, dude. Like, that's the way I view this trade anyway.
Absolutely.
All right, so Mr. Wonderful, we're done saucing you up, gassing you up. This is the biggest trade as far as pieces we got, Mike. All right, so this is a long one, a lot of process, picks to process, players to process here. So yep. I like Fish 58, right? He is getting Kyler Murray, Elijah Moore, Sam Howell, the 203, the 202, the 206, the 305, and the 102. Big package of players and picks. Astora Knight is getting Dak Prescott. He's getting Rashad White, 111, and the 101. I'll read it back again because there's a lot of pieces happening here. But this is a 12-team Superflex, start 11. I like Fish, who's our patron, is in a rebuild, and this is a best ball league. So when you think about, I think that does matter here because of the plethora. So once again, Kyler, Elijah Moore, Sam Howell, 203, 202, 206, 102, and 305 is being acquired, and he's sending away Dak, Rashad White, 101, which we know is significant in Bijan, and then the 111. I'm really curious. Like, dude, I'm not gonna lie. I've gone back and forth on this trade a lot. And I also understand probably, like, we talk best ball a shit ton. Like, this is one of our things that we stress. So even understanding all the best ball principles, I've gone back and forth on this one. So I'm really curious, Mike, what you think, and if you had enough time to process all the different moving parts here.
Yeah, I'm trying to. So when I look at like a trade like this, what I do is I'll just like cross off like equivalent assets to try and get the trade.
That's what we do too. Yeah,
like a little bit simpler.
Yes.
So like 202 plus 206 is probably equivalent to the 1.11. So I can just cross that off.
Okay.
Even though you'd want the 1.11 because the 1.11 can always move back, right? But you can't always move up. So there's a little bit of a gap there. Or so maybe if we want to be conservative, we say the 2.02 and the 2.03.
Let's even just say, for the simple case of argument, though, 202 and 206, just like you said, though, because I think best ball, at least the 2-for-1 matters more than the lineup. So let's just say 202 and 206, like you said, for 101 or 111. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. So that one's gone. And then, I mean, Sam Howell's like a really tricky one.
Super tricky, right?
to kind of value. So I'm gonna leave that one in there, but maybe. I haven't checked recent ADPs, but where does like Rashad White go? Like, is he like an RB3, RB2, low end?
He's RB2? I'll say this. I think right now he's more of a high end RB3, is in the way that the ADP
a high
goes.
End RB3.
But here's the thing: the 23 class, I think, has a chance to come in and make that become a totally different conversation. I'm not saying I don't like Rashad White or whatever, but right now, before rookies come in, he's kind of more of a high end RB3.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so if we want to maybe, I would say kind of cross like Rashad White against like maybe Sam Howell, because the thing is like Sam Howell's supposed to start, right?
Riverboat Ron does this though. You're correct.
Yeah,
By the way, he says he's likely our starter. He played well in the last
yeah,
game, but he also said that Taylor Heineke was the starter the rest of the year. He also said
yeah, yeah,
he also
exactly.
said
So you don't know.
that B Rob is going to be fucking Christian McCaffrey and all this crazy shit. So like,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So if you look at something like that, it's kind of like, I mean, maybe you could kind of put them in a similar bucket where like Rashad White, they both have very wide range of outcomes, right? Like they're either useless or they're like a starter. There's really
correct.
there's not much of like a in between because like you're not starting Rashad White if he can't start like full time because like there's just he doesn't put up enough points, right?
Correct.
But at the same time, it's best ball. So like some of these guys, I just view them as like some guys that could potentially put up like 2 or 3 spike weeks for you, like in the season, right?
Dude, 100%. We have a best ball chart. By the way, patreon.com/South Harmon. You can see our best ball chart, which has Mike just said the term, and I know we haven't discussed this, and he doesn't know about it. Spike weeks and consistency weeks are how we really look at best ball. So consistency weeks mean it's a top, a wide receiver 2, running back 2, quarterback top 15, which means that you're going to get into a lineup and you matter for scoring. But spike weeks, to your point, mean that you're going to win a week. So that's something you can get over in our Patreon. But yeah, man, that's a really good point you made about spike weeks.
Yeah. So let's assume like him plus Elijah Moore kind of wash out with Rashad White
Okay.
for the purposes here. So then what we're left with is basically Dak Prescott plus Bijan Robinson for Kyler Murray plus the 102 plus the 203
Correct.
plus the 3.05.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And right now, like I know everyone does not like Kyler Murray. Like everyone hates him.
They both. What's crazy is
I'm
they hate Kyler and they hate Dak, right? Like simultaneously.
Yeah, they hate Kyler and they hate Dak, but I think Kyler's fall from grace is probably a little bit more drastic than Dak. So maybe there's a little bit
You'd be
worse of a
correct.
taste.
I think it's close,
Yeah,
but you're right. I think Dak has the other thing too is Kyler's a running quarterback that has a ACL and it was in the
yeah,
season, so like people are fearful that he won't rush this coming up season. So I think that's where
yeah,
you're right. It leans Dak.
yeah, exactly. So then, but let's say like whatever you prefer Kyler, you prefer Dak. They're close enough
Can
to
you
the
cross them
point
off
where
though for us? I think we could.
yeah. So I think they're close enough in terms of dynasty value. I'm actually much higher on Kyler than most people are. Like I like Kyler, I like Lamar. Now, having said that, he had a really bad season, so this is like the dip. But if we just look at their current values right now in terms of how the market perceives them, you could probably cross them off. Even if you wanted to say, Kyler and the third for Dak, whatever, he crossed them off, right? Crosses off. So basically, the guy just got 1.01 for the 1.02. If you do this type of this type of equation, which
So
is how I think about trades.
yeah. So see, the way I'm 100% with you, by the way. And let me just say, now how we broke it down, how you broke it down there, it would be the 101 for the 102 and the 203 and the 305, right? That's how we kind of
Yeah,
looked at it. Yeah, and
yeah,
see, okay. Here's what I will say to our patron, I Like Fish 58. I think as a principal move, like if Sam Howell ends up being a starter or at least conceived starter for the next
hmm
6 months, that's highly
yeah,
flippable because of quarterback scarcity and all this
yep,
shit, right? That's
yep,
I think Mike already hit on this, how like he's a tricky one because it's one, how long do you hold him? What's he going to
hmm
be? And what do league mates value him as? Because you don't know. Like you may be in a very sharp league where 11 people are like, dude, I'm not buying your Sam Howell in the offseason. Fuck you. Like I'm not
hmm
paying up for what this hype is. But you could be in a
yep,
league with a bunch of, homies that are like, man, Sam Howell's the starter. And you could flip that for like a second round pick, which I think makes this kind of convoluted. So I don't know the league setting, like how the league is active. But let me say this. I get in principle what you're trying to do because when I look at these assets, right, you're looking at 8 assets for 4 in best ball. Like I get it.
hmm
I get what you're trying to do, but I do think it's interesting that Mike breaks the trades down a lot like we do. We try to cross things out and get to where the values are being won and lost. And when you do it, this is why I was on the same side as you. Like, I love what I Like Fish is doing and giving himself a lot of shots, right? Like, I talk about how much I love the second round. Like, personally, for me, like, if you told me we have to do drafts, and I'm in mock drafts almost daily, like 202, 203, and 111, the difference really is just the perceived value of the first round. Like, I think the player caliber could be very close in 202 and 203 and 111. So, like, I get what he's trying to do. My biggest criticism and why I don't want to do what you did, I Like Fish, and why I want the Astora Night side, even in best ball, is I think 101 demands more value.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. And I don't even care if you have to take if you kept 101 and took Bijan. I'm not even going to get to that point. I just think that 101 and Bijan Robinson hype is only going to continue for 3 months. So, like, if I'm going to make this trade, it's going to be later on. Like, I think right now selling for this is where the error was made. I'm not going to say that what I Like Fish side still couldn't weigh out. Like, I mean, I'm not going to give you – I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you that. But I do think that with what we know and how much Bijan's hype is – like, let me just say this about Bijan. Bijan Robinson is a running back that is outrageously talented and has been hyped for so long. But we're also looking at a market in running back where people don't value running back. But he's still head and shoulders the 101 over any quarterback in this class. Like, that's how fucking valuable Bijan is and how much people value that player and that pick. So that's my biggest criticism. When you cross it all off and you look at what 101's being sold for, it's just too light. That's the biggest thing I have problem with. That's the biggest issue I have too.
We kind of go back to what you said with Patrick Mahomes, right? Like, it's like when you buy this type of asset, people will overpay because everybody wants that asset. You're going to have 3 or 4 people in your league that are trying to like lowball you. You're going to have 2 or 3 people in your league that give you a fair value, and you're going to have 2 people at least in your league that are willing to overpay. So having said that, when you look at when we cross everything off and you break it down to 101 for the 102 plus the 203 plus 305, is that enough for the 101? Definitely not, because this is why I also don't like doing trades like this. It's like there's too many pieces and you get lost in the value and you think you're getting a nice package deal and you're not. But if you break this trade down into the components that we said, the 1.11, you could have waited until the draft or at least after the combine or after the draft is done to trade that for the 2.02 and the 2.06 at any time. That trade will always exist. I promise you. It always exists.
Right.
Okay.
Because someone will value the Dameon Pierce of last year. Someone will trade up for 111.
Yes.
Right.
Someone will see the running backs dry up and they'll be like, fuck, I need to make a move and I'm willing to give up 2 seconds to do it. And it might not be a 2.03 and a 2.06, but it might be like a 2.04 and a 2024 second or something like that.
Correct.
Which is honestly even better. So that trade always exists. There's no need to make that trade now, right?
Right.
And then the other piece, the 1.01, like I said, Bijan's going to be a first-round startup pick no matter what. Whatever league you're in, he's going to be that. I don't know if you guys ever remember Saquon Barkley hype, but this is basically that level, maybe even more because Bijan's been doing it since he was a true freshman. All right, so that's the type of hype you're thinking about. Once all the major media coverage starts playing his college highlights, they start playing his receiving ability, they start talking about his size, they start talking about his build, they start talking about everything that he is. He's going to be a first-round startup pick, and the 1.02 at a maximum in a Superflex, in my opinion, it's going to be like a third-round tops, like a third-round startup pick tops. And you cannot trade up from the third round to the first round by just giving up a second and third-round rookie pick. So that's how I think about it. And that's why that guy got such great value, is because if you just did these trades individually and you waited till the 1.01 and you were on the clock, or even if you drafted Bijan Robinson, let's say nobody trades up for you, but you draft Bijan Robinson and then training camp comes and he's fucking decking everybody, he's dodging people, he's receiving, they start talking about him like a three down threat, you're going to get more than the 1.02 plus a third round pick or second round pick. So that's why I hate these types of big trades, because when you package it together, you don't extract maximum value, because think about it, like one person has limited resources. Like they can't give you their whole team, right? But if you split the trades up into 3 components and you're trading with 3 or 4 different people, each of those trades, you can extract a maximum of what you can get. Whereas in this one, you're kind of given a package discount when you don't need to. So that's my view on this trade and why you kind of got left a lot of value on the table.
Dude, jeez, man. Like, here's the thing. I know Mike is not doing content anymore. We brought him out of retirement. But I'm disappointed that Mike, our Mike, is not here, because he would be down in the lower screen, just like glowing, smiling, because Mike just talked about startup values. And this is one of the biggest things we preach, Mike, is startup values. And when you're really struggling, trying to equate, and this is one of the things I've preached for a while, one of the biggest things and edges that can be played up is people don't understand what a player is, what that looks like in a rookie pick value, and what that rookie pick value looks like in a startup value. If you kind of think of assets as those three things and kind of get, 101, Bijan Robinson, 111, let's say, in theory, if you can equate that, I think that's where you have such an edge to play up trades like this, where there's multiple picks moving around, multiple pieces. So I'm like on the side of like, I want to be the person that, plays this up. But if you don't understand it, this is where you can get lost. I'll say this, the last thing, because I agree with everything Mike said, the last thing I will say is this. On the rebuild side, the one out I'll give I like Fish. If you're in a league where this market and this economy exists, where essentially your plan is for 202, 203, and 206, I think people that are wanting to win now will trade me 24 first for those picks. Like, that's the only scenario I think where this makes sense. Otherwise, like, there's just no way. Because I think you sold light. I think you sold light on the 101. That's just my personal opinion. Once again,
yeah, you should get a first. You should get a first. The trade to move from 1.02 to 1.01 should be a future first, at least, if not more. And people have a hard time digesting that because they're like, oh, I'm only moving up one spot, right? But like I said, when you break it down to the startup value, you're moving from the third round of the startup to the first round of a startup, and usually that requires more than a first. So
at minimum a first.
So yeah,
no one's doing it for a future second. It's just not. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So, I like Fish once again. This maybe works out for you long term. I just think process wise, it's not the right play. Last trade we got here, Mike. This is it. This is our last trade of the day. That was a big convoluted one, which took longer. Anyway, so we got B Hall getting Justin Herbert, the 308, and Jimmy G. He is sending away some premium picks: 102, 103, 107. This is 12 team start 11 Superflex lineup. Mike, what do you think? Herbert is a guy that I think is trending down, but still possesses crazy upside.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't think, could you have done this at the beginning of last season?
God, no.
Maybe.
God, no.
Maybe,
I'm gonna tell you,
not.
maybe,
Yeah,
maybe, but I shouldn't say God, no. I don't think so. And the reason I'll say that is because in startup terms, Patrick Mahomes, it's almost like this year Patrick Mahomes was like, all you fantasy gamers need to realize who I am. Y'all had me at 103 in ADP, behind Allen, behind Herbert was going ahead of Mahomes in startups, man. That's crazy to think about.
Yeah. So like now you're kind of like getting him on the low end, which is still like 3 first, and 2 of them are super early. I would say like this is probably, again, it kind of goes back to what this guy's team looks like, what his future outlook is. Like if he has no quarterbacks, and this is his like desperation move to kind of land like that cornerstone piece, like Justin Herbert will recover. It might not be this year, maybe it is this year, you don't know, but like over his career, like Justin Herbert, we have seen enough data points to know that he is a very, very elite asset.
Correct.
But it is also very challenging to win this trade on a value basis. You're almost always going to lose the trade on a value basis like this because there's no more room for him to go. Like he's already at the top. Like he's proven it. There's no more value accrual for Justin Herbert. You're not going to accrue value for the 3.08. You're probably not going to accrue much value for Jimmy G. Everyone freaking hates him. Like you can't trade Jimmy G to save your life. So
no.
But you could hit big on the 102. You could hit big on 103. You could hit big on the 107, or you could like. I couldn't imagine this happening, but like maybe in some league out there, someone decides to get cute and doesn't take Bijan Robinson like 1.01. Then you just like automatically win the trade, obviously.
Right.
But there could be that that case where you draft like a Yamir Gibbs and you draft like a Bryce Young or whatever your favorite quarterback is, and they turn out to be like superstars, and you win the trade, right? So there's that upside. So I'd say like this is like a pretty even scale. Like Wheels Smith probably got the best value that he could get for a player like Justin Herbert, and B Hall had to pay as much as he did to get him. and it just kind of comes down to what their team looks like after this. If B Hall's team after this is he starting Justin Herbert and like Jimmy Garoppolo? Not a big fan, but if he's starting Justin Herbert and like a Joe Burrow, a Jalen
Justin
Hurts,
Fields, Jalen Hurts, something
Justin
like
Fields,
that, right?
Patrick Mahomes, like another good quarterback, and he's got some, and Jimmy G's like his his safety blanket backup that he hopefully never has to rely on, then I can see it. Like quarterback market is just, it's like a game, it's super hot, right? And when you want to acquire this type of asset, we said it before, like you just have to overpay. There's really no way around it.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's the biggest thing, right? So now we are starting 11, which like difference in start 9 and start 11 isn't like massive, but when you think about it, like you got to think about like, so you got start 9, there's only 7 players that can catch the quarterbacks, where now all of a sudden you have 9 that can catch the quarterback. So depth does matter in start 11 a little more than start 9. But here's what I'll say for Will Smith. And this is something that Mike and I talk about and we've played up before, and I know you've talked about too. And I think what gets convoluted is how you play up. Like if I look at the Will Smith side, reality is, like to your point, if somehow Bijan's at 102 and someone takes at 101 the top quarterback, like you're loving life. You get Bijan, you get the second quarterback, and then in 107 becomes best player available. Like even in start 11 though, I don't know if that equates to Herbert, but now you have so many different pieces to trade away that I get it from the rebuild side. Now, here's the thing. Let's assume that the scenario of Bijan goes 101, which is going to happen in most 12-team leagues. Yep. What I do like about 102 and 103 and 107 is this. 102 and 103 now gives you the ability to forget what happens in the next 3 months. We're going to have landing spots. We're going to have – this is assuming you don't even trade the picks. But you have quarterback leverage here, right? So now all of a sudden you don't have Herbert, but you got the top 2 quarterbacks in this class. And then the crazy part about 107 is this like – It's intriguing enough of a pick for me because of this, Mike. 102 and 103 is likely a quarterback. I think even if they aren't, like you have basically 4 quarterbacks going to go in the first round. That gives you 101 with Bijan plus those 4 quarterbacks, 105. Then you have the receivers that are good enough in this class. You got JSN, you got Quentin Johnson, you got Jordan Addison. So all of a sudden, 107. What's intriguing about this pick to me is it could become the first round top 15 quarterback that people just don't want to draft, or it could become, because quarterback thirst is enough, it's the first or second wide receiver off the board. So if I look at this and I'm saying, okay, I'm going to play up the quarterback board, I'm going to go 102, 103 quarterback, and then all of a sudden 107 could become a quarterback or the top receiver off the board. There's a significant amount of risk because not one of those people could become Justin Herbert. But you also have teams that may say, well, shit, man, I need a quarterback bad. I want 102 on the clock. You may have teams that say, I want 103 because I need quarterback bad. You could still flip it around for a lot of things. You could take the quarterbacks, hoard them, trade them away for more. I think the biggest thing you taught me that I listened to about the quarterback hoard is like it works in the top 15-ish. Like, and these picks probably will be top 15-ish quarterbacks. What you don't want to do is start quarterback hoarding at Matt Ryan, at these aging assets that no one's going to value. So I guess I see the Will Smith side. I'll say this, though. If you have the picks and you've, roster constructed appropriately, does it feel a little heavy? 3 firsts for Herbert, 2 of which are early? Yeah. But if you have enough depth and Jimmy G is just a spot start bye weeks when he's got the chance to be the starter wherever he lands, and 308's, a piece you just move around, fine. If you need to do this to go get Herbert, I'm good with it. But I do think it's a little heavy, but I think if a roster constructed appropriately, it's not the worst thing in the world to go get Herbert, personally.
Yeah. Here's how Will Smith really wins, and I did this a lot when back in my day when I was like really, really heavy. I still do it, but like what I've found in my time of doing like hundreds and hundreds of trades and everything is if you can hold 4 to 5 first round picks in any draft class, you can dominate the draft and like extract maximum value from every single other player. So 3, you can probably do it 2 if you have a lot of seconds, but what you can turn this into is probably what's more appealing on the upside. And that's what I mean when I say upside. It's like Justin Herbert has no more upside because he's capped. He's already at the top, right? There's no more
Correct.
value for him to go.
Correct.
But if let's say Will Smith doesn't need quarterbacks, or let's say he's so far off from his rebuild that he's not going to go home run swinging on these quarterbacks, you can just hold 102, 103 hostage and trade back. You can trade from 102 back to a mid first, get a future first, right? Or you can trade from 102 back to middle first, get a future first, and maybe give one of your seconds. So let's say you have 2 to 3 second round picks. If you go into a draft with 3 first round picks, 2 to 3 second round picks, that is probably also enough for you to control the draft, control the flow of the draft, and get all the players that you want within your tiers without losing out on tier breaks and extracting value. Because I could, if you gave me these 3 first in like 2 or 3 seconds, I would probably leave that draft with, I might pick like 1 or 2 players in the first, and I would have left that draft with another 2024 first and at least another 2025 first. So at that point, the 3 first becomes 5 first, and then it becomes an overwhelming win for Will Smith. So that's really how he wins. So I don't know how good of a trader he is, how active he is in the draft. But if you just go into the draft and pick 3 players, this trade is very, very even. Slight overpay on B Hall side to get Justin Herbert. But if Will Smith is like a slick trader and you implement like, I mean, I wrote a bunch of strategy guys back in the day about like trading back in the draft class, and it probably still applies still this day. But if you kind of implement a lot of those policies, you could leave this draft class with the value of 5 first plus very easily, very easily.
And I think the other thing that's great point to that, last thing I'll say is that on this trade at least, 102 and 103 are quarterbacks, which are, it's either quarterback range or high end receiver. Gibbs, if he ends up checking, whatever. You don't even have to care what your league mates value. If they want to trade into this and you're in full rebuild and you've already got 24 picks, like I think what could happen here is if you can trade out, if you're in a league that's very active in trading and people value the picks, especially before or on the clock, this could end up being 102 you trade out for 2 24s, 23 you trade out for a 24 and a 25. Now all of a sudden you have like 4 or 5 shots in 24 and you have 2 shots in 25. Here's what's really interesting about that. 23, we don't love the quarterback class. Like there's a reality one of them could fire and absolutely matter. Like we didn't love Justin Herbert either. We didn't love Josh Allen, right? So it could happen. But if you have 5 picks in 24, 4 picks in 24, 1 or 2 of which are early, if you have a chance to get Caleb Williams, you have a chance to get quarterback assets that are very high in that class. That's how you, 1, build up a plethora of picks, and then 2, you could end up with someone that like we're talking about. Bijan is so valuable. Like Caleb Williams, if everything continues to be the same thing 365 days from now, is going to have outrageous hype. And that's where if you have a shot to get him or you end up having that pick, you could play out of this to so much more value than just Herbert. To your point, like Herbert can't go up in value. Herbert's basically you're kind of sinking into like, I just want an elite quarterback in this format. But what's he going to go up in value? I mean, we've already seen him at 102. He's at 105, like in dynasty value. Like he can't gain more value. It's a cornerstone piece, but I'm with you. I probably take Herbert here because I know what I would do with my team and how it would be constructed. But if you also are telling me like my team doesn't have enough value and I'm going to take these picks, I think I could trade them into a lot of different things. So I see it from both sides. Yeah. I'd lean B Hall, but I really do think that if you're a savvy trader, you can make 102, 103, 107 something special too.
Yeah, this is how you kind of start the Iron Bank. You know, you make a trade like this, you dominate a single draft class, and you either go, that domination leads you to becoming an instantaneous contender, or you compound those returns and then you get 5 first in the future year. And then when the next year comes, you can, if you're ready, you go all in. And if you're not, you take those 3 first and you turn into 4 or 5 more. And like it keeps rotating and you keep pushing value back and you keep accruing value. And eventually like you win. Like Dynasty, you know, people talk about like, oh, I just want to get my guy and win and I just want to win and whatever. Like that's true. But like all of my best teams, I've just accrued value over 2 to 3 years. And at some point, I'm just like so far ahead of the rest of the league in terms of my value that my teams are so good that they have the best chances of winning. And even then, you're not guaranteed to win because it's a very high variance game, and any week anything can happen, of course. But you're just trying to give yourself the best odds. And like if I look at all of my most dominant teams, that's how they were built. I accrued a shitload of value from like years 1 to 3, and then like people just had no chance to catch up because I just kept trading and I kept getting more picks. And every year I'm showing up with like 2, 3 first, and my team is already the best in the league. So it's like, how do people contend against that? You know, most of the time they can't. And like sometimes you do too well and the league folds, which is not ideal. But if you play with people that are willing to stick it out, like that's how you build true dynasties.
Yeah, I think that's 100% the reality. I think too, what you saw me do in the beginning, right? That's kind of to Mike's point. Like if you dynasty appropriately and you apply the principles we talk about here, if you've listened to Mike in the past, if you tune in, like it's funny, Mike, I don't know if you know this, last episode we had DF Bean Counter, your buddy Drew was on the show. If you apply the principles that are being talked about with, dynasty values, trading back, getting value, like I basically, when I traded up for Mahomes and spent all that, I had already been watching Mike for years. I had basically stockpiled so many first round picks, so you can continue to play that up. And then eventually, if you decide, you know what, I have so much picks, but I want to make sure I get this one piece, now you can afford to overpay and force a manager to give you whatever asset you want to. Like there's so many different ways to play it. But honestly, like I think what you're talking about here is something that we try to preach a lot, and that's trying to find edges, trying to find ways to pick up value over time for your team. And then when you have more dynasty value than other teams do, and if you do it in the right timing, for example, that Mixon trade, if you want to go get Mixon, you can do that later on when you have all the Iron Bank. You don't want to do that in February. So I guess that's another trade. A lot of these trades I think should be applicable for you. Last point I'll make, if you do want your trades featured on this show, patreon.com/South Harmon, $1 a month gets you in the door. You can put your trades on there. We'll feature them on the show, break them down, talk about them. We might get a guy like Mike Liu on here to give you some, OG and some wisdom on the trades. But Mike, man, we really appreciate you hopping on. Thanks for giving us the time, breaking down the trades. Any final thoughts or things you wanted to say before you get up out of here?
No, man. Thanks for having me on the show. It's good to talk a little bit of football again. I haven't done it in, I think maybe well over a year now. Happy that you guys are having success for your show and you guys are growing. And yeah, keep up the strategy content, man. I feel like I've always felt like that was a very underserved part of the market, which is why that's like what I focused on. Like my true belief is that if people spend 80%, 90% of the time on strategy and 10% on player analysis, you become an infinitely better player. Whereas in reality, I think most people spend like 80% of the time on player analysis and like 10 to 20% on strategy. So truly, like if you want to win, if you want to play winning dynasty now, if you want to have fun with your boys and do whatever, it doesn't apply to you. But if you want to win dynasty over the long term, like focusing on strategy and like market analysis and valuations and how to accrue value to your portfolio, which is really how you should think about the dynasty game, that's how you win. And I've like always won. Like I've never lost in a season for dynasty because that's like was my personal philosophy. Like, sometimes I had lower returns in other years, but like I don't think I've ever crossed below 50% ROI on my money on fantasy. And I think it's because there's like a huge gap that's not filled there, and people are getting smarter. People like you are making content, and hopefully more people like you continue to kind of build that type of content. But yeah, focusing on strategy is like the true unsung hero of winning dynasty fantasy football.
Yeah, 1,000%. And you know what's even for someone like myself, Mike, I'm sure at times, although this is literally for me one of the GOATs, like one of the ones that I started watching, why I'm doing content now. But when I look at the moves I made last year where I failed, a lot of times it was I'm trying to make player analysis. I believe in this guy. And the reality was I broke my process, right? And if you don't break your process over and over for a specific player that's not a Patrick Mahomes guaranteed 10 years in the league, like when I broke my process for Cam Akers, like, okay, maybe Cam Akers smashes next year, but I lost whatever I traded for Cam Akers last year. Like there's player analysis that is important, and I'm not saying it's not a piece that matters, but overall, if you make mostly process moves and you listen to the show, you listen to other people's shows, and strategies at the big part, you can make up for player analysis misses. Like that's the beauty of the way we dynasty and the way that Mike's given us a lot of principles. So I appreciate you hopping on, man. Once again, everybody, we appreciate you tapping in. If you could go down, hit the subscribe if you're new to the channel. If you're not, go ahead, leave a like, leave a comment. Let us know how you feel about the show. So we appreciate everybody. Hope you have a great weekend, and we will see you back here same time, same place place next week for the Dynasty Trade Show. We're out of this thing. Peace.